Welcome to our adult ed session, our adult and teen ed session. So we're going to tell you a little bit about our El Salvador trip this year that we just completed about 3 weeks ago. It's colder here than it was in El Salvador. Although El Salvador was chillier and windier than we've ever experienced it, so that was kind of interesting. So let's open with prayer before we consider these stories of a different culture. Dear God, open our hearts as we hear these stories and hear these experiences to the fullness and the greatness and the diversity of your world. Give us understanding hearts and open minds. In your name we pray. Amen. Okay, so this was our 10th official congregational trip to El Salvador. But in many ways, it was like a first trip. For reasons we'll go into a little bit later, but we had a pretty good share of our travelers were first-time travelers, and that hasn't happened for a while. So I'll introduce our group by photo. We had 11 people this time. We had Adam Fendos, who's a freshman at Madison, and his mom, Heidi. And we had...
Wave, Heidi.
We had Jill and Tim Nelson, who've been 5 or 6 times, I think, to El Salvador, and their daughter, who's also a freshman. She's at Concordia with her first trip. Elena, we're in here today. Ginger Wooster, it was her second trip. Dave Fagerberg, first trip. Renee Maybe, first trip. And Andrea Maybe, Renee's daughter, who's a freshman at Colorado, and also was her first trip. So it was a new experience for them, and I thought it might be helpful to put them on the spot, Dave and Renee particularly, just with the impressions you have, because it's been a while since we've seen El Salvador through the eyes of people who've never seen it before. So,
Come on up.
come on up.
All right, get up.
Hola, hola.
Yes.
Okay, this was my first trip to El Salvador, and it was a wonderful experience. It was a total cultural immersion for me. I hadn't been overseas in a long time, and it was complete, total, different people, different environment. Everything was totally different, and there was some things were a little bit shocking, but you have to look at their culture in their own culture. You can't look at it from our standpoint, because a lot of things could be it could be not depressing, but quite different from theirs to ours. But it was a wonderful trip. Got to see a lot of exciting things. I climbed mountains. Well, halfway up.
Small mountains.
Small mountains, yeah. And then we experienced a tiny little earthquake. That
was the first.
confession. And then saw the ocean, tickle my feet in the water in the ocean a little bit. So yeah, it was a great trip. I'm glad I went. I would certainly go again. I would kind of, if I had the choice, I would like to get a little bit more involved in it throughout the year rather than just go and forget about it and that kind of thing. I like it enough. I would like to be a tiny little part of it. And I got to hug the Lutheran Bishop of El Salvador.
How does he hug?
I actually hugged him on the wrong side, and then he said he got his heart to heart, and then we had to go around each other in order to do the proper hug. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it.
Would you demonstrate the proper hug for us? How you and Pastor Chris, maybe?
No.
We would happily do that for you.
Here's my review. Okay.
So the bishop always hugs heart to heart.
Yeah, right.
So
This way. Okay.
Instead of how we normally hug, which is the other way, he hugs this
Yeah,
way.
right. Yeah. But I was,
So that your hearts come together.
I was corrected by an important man.
Who is that? Oh, me?
Pastor Chris. Okay,
Say that again? What did you call me?
yeah, I had the honor, he was my roommate for a couple of nights, so that was indeed an honor.
We snore, so they put us together.
They have matching hats too.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
Okay.
I bought mine first.
You have a translator. And how did you find your working relationship with the translator?
It was very nice. It was very easy. She was very good. Her name is Maria Sanchez. I mean, they call her Flor. Was her nickname?
Floor.
Yeah, Flor. And she was very, very good. And I think she did an excellent job because I never experienced that before. But yeah, it made it a lot. It would have been really hard without, because I didn't know Spanish hardly at all. So, you know, other than smiling at people, you know, and you're being nice.
The other question, the El Salvadoran food, how did you find that?
The food in general was very good. Some of it was a little bit exotic for me. But,
What was exotic?
well, I don't know what, yeah, I get a little tired of eating rice and beans for breakfast.
That's
What do you usually have for breakfast?
Cheerios. I'm going to get the hook off stage here pretty minute.
I'm not really sure I can top that. I got to hug the bishop too and hold his hand when we were at a group meeting. We all held hands and I was sitting next to him. So he wears a lot of aftershave. That's all I can say.
Those first impressions.
Those first impressions, yeah. Last year I had the opportunity to travel to Costa Rica, which is near El Salvador, relatively speaking, in Central America. And so that was kind of my comparison a little bit, and that was definitely more tourist-based. And even though these two countries are very close together, it was like night and day. El Salvador appears to be a much poorer country. I think the people are very rich and wealthy in their love for their country and for each other, but I was really struggling with how my first impressions were without it sounding depressing. I guess I was shocked by seeing armed guards everywhere outside of every business and barbed wire around every house or community place, and so to me that was very shocking and eye-opening, and I was like, should I be concerned? Should I be worried? Am I in danger? But of course, with Gretchen and Chris, so it's like everything's gotta be okay, you know, and I have my daughter with me, what could possibly go wrong? And after a week you kind of realize this is every day for these people, and you know, nobody seems too fazed by it, but that's their everyday life. And I think getting to know the people, they're very happy, compassionate people, but I couldn't help but feeling a sense of hopelessness in a way, especially talking to the people at the Synod and seeing some of the projects they're doing. They're very hopeful. So the situation is hopeless, but the people are very hopeful. They really are trying very hard to make something good and trying to help each other. And then the hopelessness part comes in that they just don't have a whole lot of resources, either money or leadership. You know, it seems like it's kind of a circle. Maybe I'm wrong, but that was kind of my impression. And so it felt good that knowing that our congregation is a part of trying to help them with this hope, to try to help them to organize themselves or to find administration or to help them figure out how they can help each other, because the church is very poor. They don't have very much to work with to help their communities and their own churches. So So I thought it was a great, it was eye-opening. It was great for my daughter to see this too, who's been very privileged in her travel opportunities to Europe and to all these other places. So I think it was great for her to see, what kind of work we can be doing to help each other. So thank you to the congregation for, supporting us and giving us that opportunity, for me, that opportunity to go. So I loved the food.
Even the beans?
I did not like, what is it, pollo campero, but that was Dave's favorite.
You gotta tell them what pollo campero is.
It's Kentucky Fried Chicken, basically. And
Their version of it.
their version of it, so anyway. So, thank you.
It's so popular that people literally get buckets of chicken to bring back to the United States from Pollo Campero. So you get on the plane and there's often people with literally large buckets of chicken.
So the plane smells of fried chicken.
Yeah, it's weird.
So I think those were both really helpful perspectives. I think the cultural difference is apparent in food to some degree, in expectations. I'd like to just comment on what Renee said about the church. It is a poor church, and they are intentionally poor. Bishop Gomez has been bishop of that church since 1986. It grew out of the Civil War, and the Civil War was very much a conflict between the rich and the poor. And the Lutheran Church advocated on behalf of the campesinos and on behalf of the poor. And they located themselves in poor communities. Many of those communities formed by people who had been living in refugee camps. So they continue to be very small, very poor churches. So we've been there in the past where they've stood up after the offering and told us how much they collected, and it's maybe $3 from the whole congregation. So monetary resources are an issue for them. And of course, our partnership is about much more than monetary resources, and that's a little thing we'd like to talk about too. So the point of the trip, often we hear, this is a mission trip, so what do you do on mission trips? Anyone?
Preach.
Preach, okay, that kind of mission trips. On our kind of mission trips, often it's like, what do you think about work, right? You go, you build houses, you paint houses, you repair houses, you serve in a soup kitchen or something. These trips are intentionally relationship trips. So it's hard to say, when people say, what are you going to do? When people who are interested say to us, what are you going to do? It's kind of like, it's hard to answer because we can't say, well, we're going to go and we're going to participate in the habitat build or we're going to do this. So once you've gone, I think that it's clear to you that it's about relationships and you're very busy the whole time, but it's hard to quantify what you do. So the point of the trip is to recognize that we're all part of a bigger family, a family of God. And as such, we have friends in El Salvador who we see from time to time in that picture every year. We're pictured with, it was in the pink t-shirt, that's Pastora Gloria. She's very energetic. We've worked with her on a number of things. The one in the lower right is Flor. She was our translator. She's a university student, and she's just begun translating within the past couple of years. She was actually served at a camp in South Dakota last summer, similar to Pine Lake here, to get her English more solid. She did a nice job translating for us, and she was just a wonderful, playful person. She learned within a day that it's fun to tease Pastor Chris. So that was really entertaining the rest of the week.
Really did enjoy that part.
And then in the upper right, is Pastora Avelina, and she's the wife of the bishop. She's in charge of education programs for the church. And then the next picture, that's Pastor Raphael. Most of you probably remember that we had a very sad death a few years ago of Pastora Norma, who was in charge of the Partnership Parish office. That is her husband. He is also a pastor He's like the communications director and an assistant to the bishop. Also very playful. He's always got a joke or a story. He invited us to his house for dinner for the second year in a row. Do you have more people or no?
I don't know.
What the bishop?
I was gonna try and show the party picture,
Oh, there's the bishop.
but this is at his house.
Oh, that's at his house. Many of those are members of his family. There's 3 daughters and a lot of the youth from his church. So, okay, so I'm going to invite other people who are on the trip to jump in if you have anything to say about any of these topics. El Salvador is Renee said it was less of it, that she felt Costa Rica was not as poor as El Salvador. And that may be true. I mean, El Salvador is a poor country, but it would be equally possible to go to El Salvador and not see those parts. You could go to the beaches, you could go visit some of their, you could go to parts of San Salvador and not see all of the poor parts. So it is a beautiful, beautiful country. They have very many beautiful natural resources, volcanoes, beaches, lakes. We did experience a little earthquake. I don't know if you felt it. I heard it. Did you feel
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
It was very slight. It was over before we realized what it was, really. I mean, it was more of the building rattling itself because we were outside. So by the time the rattling ended, we were like, what was that? And then the cooks came flying out and we were like, earthquake? And they all shook their head, so.
I thought they dropped something in the kitchen. Turns out I was wrong. So, and they had an earthquake the previous week too, off the coast. So there was some rattling going on while we were there. But it is beautiful. That is the ocean, the beach. Do you want to be Lopango or not? That's an overlook of San Salvador.